So here, the next piece that we're going to fit is going to be the trigger. We'll see how this one fits, but there are a few features on these aftermarket triggers people really should be looking for when they're purchasing, and that is this little tab right here that's got a line. It's separated. These can be bent forward on both sides to reduce the pre-travel. This is what really makes a trigger job hot stuff, is when it has like virtually no take up, and you get a light pull and you just press it and go. So we'll see how it fits into the frame. We're definitely going to have to do some polishing on the trigger itself, but yeah, see, that's really stiff to get that trigger to go in that channel in the trigger guard. So we're going to have to do maybe some reduction on the trigger itself, on the trigger shoe, and stone the frame as well. So that's going to be our next item on the agenda. We'll grab a trigger slot stone and start working on that to get that smoothed out to where it just falls under its own weight. So I'll grab that stone and be right back. So this is the stone for the trigger track. It fits nicely. It's just slightly undersized from the trigger track in the frame itself, and it also fits where the shoe comes through in the frame. So we're going to stone that a little bit and try to see if there's any burrs in there, and that's what's causing it to hang up. This is not an aggressive stone, so it's not really going to remove much material. It's going to polish any super high spots, and it's going to remove hopefully any burrs that are in that track that are causing that trigger to hang up. Then we're going to come back and we're going to polish some surfaces on the trigger bow to get it to really glide. So you'll take this stone and just lay it in that track, and it feels a little gritty in there, but you'll just work this back and forth to reduce any high spots in that track. And again, this is not removing much material, so I mean, you can get pretty liberal with your stoning. You don't have to just take 2 or 3 strokes and then stop to make sure you didn't take too much. It looks like a couple of high shiny spots down in there. And as I said, if this doesn't eliminate that bind, we will have to reduce that shoe a little bit. We'll look to see where it's making contact and where we need to reduce. So we want to do on the shoe entrance there, we want to do the top and the bottom. This part's a little bit trickier, but because you don't really want to ding up you don't want to stone your frame, you want to just stone that channel. Now, depending on your finish also, if you're going to Cerakote one or blue one, then you're going to polish it out for bluing, or you're going to bead blast it for Cerakoting. But this is a stainless gun. Now, it is going to get bead blasted just to match the color and the finish between the frame and the slide. It really doesn't feel too bad. So let's see if that made any difference. Not really. None whatsoever. So yeah, so that I'm pretty sure that I'll work this back and forth a little bit and then hopefully show you some markings on the trigger shoe on where we need to reduce. Nope. A little bit on the bottom, but not anything real visible. So I'm going to continue to work on this rather than keep filming, and I will come back when we have something to look at and show you what we're doing next. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking the trigger and I'm going to sand down, starting just with some 400 grit paper to sand down the top and bottom of the trigger shoe to see if we can get a good fit from top to bottom, because I really don't see any markings on the sides, so I don't think it's pinched on the sides. So I'm pretty sure it's just the shoe needs to be reduced a little. So I'm just going to run the shoe over it, try to get me a nice flat sand on this granite. I love granite for sanding or stoning, but especially sanding. Just gives you a nice flat surface, which is pretty much what we want on 1911s. Yeah, that's reducing. Let me see if I can get that. So, trying to see if I can get a good angle here. There's a shinier spot toward the bottom here, and then it's kind of dull in here where we're hitting this high spot. And the same thing on the top, or yeah, the top. We've got a little shiny area here and a little shiny area here, and it's kind of dull in the middle, which indicates that's much lower than this. So we want to definitely reduce these edges and try to get that smooth. So I'll do some more polishing on that and come back and show you where we're at. So pretty much finished the fitting on the trigger itself, of the shoe. We still have a lot of work to do on the trigger, but pretty much finished that. I want to show you now. We're going to be doing some other work on the sides here, but to reduce some of this. But it's very, very free now. There's a little hang up right on the front end because we've still got to adjust for our pre-travel with those tabs. But it's definitely very smooth in comparison to what it was, and it's going to get smoother. So the next thing that we want to look at is polishing out. Actually, before we go any further on that, this will be the last thing we have to do on the frame, because after we get this trigger finished, it's going to stay assembled. So what you want to do is, there's another stone, and where the bosses are for the thumb safety, the grip safety, the hammer, and the sear pins, you want to just take a stone and make sure there's no burrs in those areas, and you want to just stone the inside of the frame. This really takes very little unless you find something major. Looks good. And again, most of what we're doing on these trigger jobs is just eliminating friction. And so this is a new build, but we're kind of calling it a trigger job because, well, we're not going to send a new build out with a crappy trigger. All right. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. So back to the trigger, we want to polish all three sides here. We want to polish the bows, because if you remember, we stoned the rails that those travel in, and we want to polish the rear of the bow because that's where the disconnector rides, and we want that to, and it also engages the sear. So we want that to be nice and smooth, so there's no friction there. Again, we're gonna start with some 400 grit paper, and I'm actually going to turn this a little bit differently. And I usually just put the 2 fingers in the bow, and that keeps a level, even pressure. And yeah, so we have real bright and shiny right here, where that's our high area, and then back here it's not touched, so it's low. We're not worried about low spots. Low spots don't make contact. High spots make contact. So we'll do the other side, see what it looks like, and then pretty much the same. Shiny high spots here, low spot back here. Now for the back, you want to be careful. You want to kind of put some downward pressure on the trigger shoe, but you want to make sure that that stays nice and level. I'm gonna have to grab another sheet of 400 here. You want to put a little bit of light pressure, but you don't want to put a lot of pressure because you don't want to alter the bow, bend the bow, trigger bow, and then it doesn't fit in the slot anymore. And you will chase that rabbit for weeks. It's pretty uniform all the way across. So all the way across there looks pretty uniform. All right. Now I'm going to grab my Arkansas stone, and it's all going to get stoned the same way. Yep. So on the back of the bow, the all the way around the edges is shiny. The center is not. It's up to you. That's a low spot. It's not going to necessarily affect the disconnector routing on it. You can leave it that way and polish it a little more. So it's pretty close to being smoothed out, it looks like. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit more. Yeah, it's looking better, so I'm going to keep going. All of this adds up. You know, it's one of that a little goes a long way thing. If you try to do everything in one area of a trigger assembly, it's gonna be crappy. If you do a little here and a little there, it all adds up to a nice trigger pull. I think that'll be okay. And this is all the trigger's really going to move once the gun is assembled. It's a 1911 trigger. It's not going to move that much. So that is like super smooth right there. So I'm happy with how that trigger feels. Our last thing to do is bend the tabs forward that I talked about in the beginning to try to reduce some of the pre-travel. And this is kind of a feel thing that you just kind of have to make small adjustments. You'll be able to see after you do a few of these what the trigger should look like sitting in the gun. And you want to be really careful not to, you want to support the bow and the trigger shoe so they don't get bent in this process, because it is a bit of tension on it. So you can kind of now see, maybe let me see if I can get in, how the tabs right here are bent out. And that's about how that should look sitting in the gun. Maybe we'll do just a little bit more. You can always bend them back just a little bit if it's too far forward and you don't have any, I mean, because the trigger still has to reset. Yeah, that looks pretty good right there. It might be a little too far back, but if it is, we'll affix it back forward. So with that, we'll go ahead and put the mag catch in. And our trigger now doesn't hang up at all. It's just, it drops under its own weight. There's no resistance. So that's good. All right, so now we're going to move on to hammer, full cock notch, the sear, the disconnector. We have a lot of stuff still to address. So we'll be right back with that.